I really enjoy reading your notes. In fact, I use your notes to write up the newspaper article. I go 9 o'clock, I read your notes right away. They're my crib sheet to write up the article for the public. And so I thank you. You do take, all of you take real thorough notes. The other thing before I turn this over to Bob, just to do a little PR for our next Teaching Fellows class. As I think most of you know, the title is This Old House, which is sort of a play on Bob Vila's, how to fix up an old house, but that's really not what it's about. It's about the history of our town as told by old houses. And so, for instance, our opening session, a little change in the program, is going to be on downtown Rensselaer. We thought we'd better say something about it before the whole thing burns down. And so we'll be reminiscing. We've got some people to reminisce about turn of the century Rensselaer. As most of you know, there was the McVickers Hotel where Hardee's is now, and lots of other fun stuff. And then on through places like Drexel Hall or Moody House or the Underground Slave Railway, which really aren't so much houses as they tell us maybe something we didn't know or else forgot about the history of our town. It gets history credit at St. Joe's, and I'm really looking forward to it. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to the real genius of the arts teaching fellows, who is responsible for all these people you're hearing. Bob Lewis.
Thank you. Before you get to this old house, next week we have, in the last session on the arts, we have John Yost McCallum who's going to talk about George Ade. And believe me, he knows George Ade, and it should be very interesting. He's been instrumental in having the George Ade house restored. And he knows George Ade's history very well, so it should be an interesting session. Tonight, however, we have Theater in the USA since 1930, Reflections of an Amateur. I'm not real sure how much of an amateur he is. Frank Fisher studied theater in the Department of Speech, receiving his degree from Northwestern University in 1936. He's best known by most of everybody in Rensselaer as a fine architect of the principal of Fisher Associates, which has offices in Chicago and Indianapolis, and the creator of several buildings around Rensselaer as an architect. What a lot of people don't know is that Frank is also an accomplished artist, painter, and a theater buff who has attended and studied theater literally all over the world. So with that brief introduction, I give you, please welcome Frank Fisher.
I hope I can live up to that introduction. Like he says, I am an alumnus of Northwestern University School of Speech, class of 36, so that you don't have to count on your fingers. That's 60 years ago. This is my 60th reunion. I have done, in the early days, just about everything in the theater, that played every role. I've been an actor, a director, an artistic director, a scenic designer, and lately I've been associated with the Classic Theater Company, and I've been playing elderly parts, old men appropriately, of course. Tonight we're going to talk about two things. But first let me say that my initial contact with the theater came in my third year in high school. I had a very indulgent English professor who permitted me to cut the class on Wednesday afternoons, his class on Wednesday afternoons, so I could attend matinees in Chicago, matinees downtown. And it was from that time on that I was a confirmed theater goer, a confirmed member of the theater. At that time, as I recall, the tickets in the theaters cost $1.50. And not only that, but most of the time there was 2 for 1. And frequently I got in for nothing because there were that few people in 1930 who were going to the theater. Now at that time, the commercial theater was dedicated to naturalism. But tonight we're going to talk about 2 movements in the theater that have occurred since World War I. And since World War I, these 2 movements span my time, my interest in the theater. The movements are Expressionism and the theater of the absurd. How many people here have ever heard of either one? Not many. But they are the 2 movements that characterize the modern theater. They differentiate the old, or the theater that we are most familiar with, which is naturalism. They have an entirely different approach to the theater, and we're going to talk about that tonight. First, we're going to talk about the theater of Expressionism. Now, at the time, after World War II, the commercial theater was dedicated to naturalism. The plays were realistic, the characters all identifiable, the sets were real rooms, and some of them even had ceilings. However, in the background, or I should say really underground, there was a movement called Expressionism, which in its pure form was unlike any realistic theater at the time. I would be better if I pulled my glasses. This movement started after World War I and was a direct response to the horrors of that war. The slaughter of soldiers and civilians, the total destruction of property, and the disruption of lives and habits of mores. Now, many of the dramatists of the period had been soldiers, some of them refugees, but mostly this movement was European. It went along with the Expressionist painting and poetry. I'm sure most of you have heard of Expressionism in painting and probably Expressionism in poetry. In America, it was really an avant-garde movement in the little theaters, in storefronts and in lofts. But it was the first wave of creative theater pushing against the walls of what we have always called the well-made play. Now, what distinguishes Expressionism from the well-made play? In the first place, Expressionism sought to expose the inner man, that is his subconscious, his dreams, his nightmares. This, the practitioners maintained, is the true human being, not the external representation of people that we see in the theater talking in syntax, in an orderly procession, an orderly development toward a solution, which is, of course, the conclusion of the play, a story with a plot. The subconscious does not work that way. It is disjointed, a jumble of images, not necessarily related. There are flashes of intuition, and no language is involved. You, all of you I know will verify this, you just see images. And oddly enough, they're in black and white. There is no color in your subconscious. And these, according to Freud and Jung, and the other, is the real you. The you that the Expressionists wished to capture in their work, and the you being, of course, in the beginning, the author who writes, who tells what is on his subconsciousness. Now, it is thought that this is the closest to universal truths as any individual sees it. Thus, the plays are dream plays, dreams of romanticism, dreams of a sense of mission for the redemption of the world from a meaningless and insanely materialistic world. Now, one of the earlier expressionist plays is a tour de force by a dramatist whose name is George Kaiser, K-I-S-E-R. The title of his play is Alcibiades Saved. Now, in this, Socrates, the intellectual, knows that if he discloses an absurd secret, that is, the hero is no hero, he, the hero, would become a laughing stock. And faith in history and human greatness would be greatly shattered. So it is better, he thought, to interpose a new message between traditional hero worship and the absurdity of truth, than to allow it to make all messages henceforth ridiculous. This, of course, is subversive, but serves as a screen between man and the devastating insight into the absurdity of his existence. Now, this, of course, you recognize happens all the time. A blind eye, as we know, is turned toward the sins and misconduct, or the alleged sins and misconduct of a president, because it would damage the image of the presidency. So I shall read now Alcibiades Saved. First, there is a eulogy for Alcibiades because he came back from the war a hero. And the eulogizer was saying all very nice things about what he had done. And he says, among other things, praise the road toward Alcibiades. Alcibiades has saved Greece. From the praise of Alcibiades, praise swells toward Socrates. Socrates saved Alcibiades. He said, thanks become loud that are meant for you, Alcibiades. And then the prize awarder says, worthless is the speech that would void debt to you, Socrates. And he goes on to say, giving you the only prize that glorifies Greece, since she bestows it with a rarity beyond rarity, the golden wreath. From the middle step, and I explained that there were certain steps in this praise, and the middle step is in between the high and the low. He says, from the middle step to which the four bore you, mount alone over the last stairway to supreme steepness, which only he overcomes for whom the best prize is proper. Set your foot on tread and tread above tread until all the steps bring you to the crown of the golden wreath. And Socrates rises and he says, I give the golden wreath to Alcibiades. And the prize of order is rather stunned by this, and he says Alcibiades has saved, or Socrates has saved Alcibiades, and Alcibiades has saved Greece, and now Socrates superimposes the rescue of Greece upon his deed, which saved Alcibiades. Socrates declines the golden wreath, the highest honor. Socrates wishes to crown Alcibiades. Now we enter Act 2. This is an attic room, gray, whitewashed, bare, 2 doors at the rear, small window in a slanting wall, and Socrates is sitting before the left wall making a herma. A herma is a religious symbol, a column with the head of Hermes on top, and it was used as a means of protection for your house and your gateway and so forth. And enters Xanthippe from the right and through a kitchen doorway, and places herself under the window, which her face does not reach. She goes out again, and Socrates goes on working, bending over his tub of clay. Xanthippe returns with a footstool, places it beneath the window and steps on it. Now she opens the window and thrusts her head out, and Socrates continues to bend low over his tub. Xanthippe steps down, and she says, "Roofs out there. No end of roofs, and roofs and roofs. Those are walls around the mind." Socrates is silent. Xanthippe says, "That's a street, and a street through streets. They cross an angle. It makes your head swim." Socrates is silent. Xanthippe says, "This is a stone box. It rattles, it creaks, upstairs and downstairs, screeches and whispers through every wall. It drives you to jump through the window so as to stop the seeing and the hearing." Socrates is silent. Xanthippe continues, "Why," she says, "did we move inside of the city wall?" Socrates is silent. Xanthippe says, "Give me one valid reason. A man would have to think up 1,000 reasons to justify himself. There was a house. For whom? For us. There was a garden patch. For everyone? With a fence. For us. There was fresh air, sun, wind, rain. Our share. Whatever our share was, that belonged to us from morning till midnight. Every leaf and stem and tree. And woe to anyone who came in uninvited. I'd have helped him over the pickets." Socrates says, "I needed quiet." Xanthippe said, "That wasn't desert enough for you, and here you settled down in this anthill." Socrates says, "The rush was coming. On your account, I saved Alcibiades." "Ah," she says, "that's war stuff. Now we're at peace. Nobody wants to talk about that lost campaign." Socrates, I declined the wreath of honor. "Will that," she said, "make you a sensation?" He said, "Not overnight." "And the consequences," she asks. Socrates says, "Intruders, gapers, twaddlers. Xantippe, does that frighten you? Socrates, am I to work with them, crowding around my tub, bumping into my elbows, an artist can only work in solitude. Xantippe said, I never heard such nonsense. What? I just won't repeat what I think. You're a maker of hermi, by the dozen. Hermi that people put in gateways. Socrates, you're defaming the sacred things of the city. Xantippe, those hermi stand in the public places. They are sacred to me. That's not what you make. The ones who you make is offending here. Here is a man who compares his cheap goods with the sacred ones. Socrates said, my skill can be developed. Xantippe, in an attic room, lighted by a cellar window, Socrates is silent. Xantippe said, you saved Alcibiades. You rejected the prize of honor. That's a start. That sort of thing can be developed. But now, I guess you want them to come and be astonished. That is Socrates. There he sits and makes hermi by Socrates. That's going to be all the rage. Hard. Nonsense. Your fists formed it. That's sufficient. You'll have more orders than you can fill. Now life's going to begin. I'll take hold of it with both hands. Socrates says, life. Xantippe, you're going to pack them up here. That's done in 3 shapes. I laugh, set free. There are your roofs, streets, stone boxes. Farewell. Out there blossoms the air. Garden patches grow green. Neighbors greet you over the fence. I say, let's go. He says, lights. Xantippe says, I'll shout till the whole house gathers. I'll stir up the quarter. I'll scream for help. Here is Socrates who wants to murder me. Socrates, I must stay where we are, wife. Xantippe, am I to choke to death in these walls? Socrates, what crushes me is space. Xantippe, husband, Socrates says, I have fled to this attic and must conceal myself. What have you done, she says. I saved Alcibiades and gave the golden wreath to Alcibiades. Xantippe, are you afraid of your own heroic deeds? He says it doesn't exist. I didn't want to save Alcibiades, and I didn't want to give Alcibiades the golden wreath. But she says, you saved Alcibiades. I, with my hunchback, the last in line, must they not place me above Alcibiades, who shivered light in body and armor? Who am I, who even gave the wreath to Alcibiades and set myself above reward and thanks that are due to him? Who am I? A badly wounded man who drove a thorn into his foot in the cactus field and could not go along in the retreat, who laid about him because a man wanted to stir him up to be his guide, who was indifferent to anyone who came, whether friend or foe, only wanted to go on sitting, so that no footstep should drive the thorn deeper into my foot. Who could not climb the steps to the civic temple because the thorn was like fire? Now if I don't support my foot over this stool and let it dangle a hand's breadth above the floor, then Tiffany, you didn't pull the thorn out? The base of it broke off. She says, I'll get a doctor. Oh, he would bring to light, and more would be revealed, the monstrous swindle which would make Alcibiades ridiculous for all time. The thorn you ran into your foot? No, he said, the cactus field extended over the plain on which we retreated. That is notorious, and now a cactus thorn is stuck in my foot. One can't walk 10 steps like this, and I can't stay behind. I saved Alcibiades. I gave him the golden wreath under the perpendicular stair. The doctor will quickly make me well, but he'll make Alcibiades sick at the end of his spine. She says, what in the world will we do? So much for Alcibiades. Now then, to continue, one can go back to Shakespeare. He too wrote dream plays. One of them, of course, he even titled A Midsummer Night's Dream. His plays, many of them are dreams filled with poetic images. The sets are bare, or at best symbolic, nothing really realistic about them. And in the late 19th century, we had Ibsen, who wrote dream plays. In fact, one of them he called Ghosts. They too probed the subconscious, but Ibsen did this within a realistic, well-made play format. His characters speak with syntax. His sets are real rooms. But today, if you present a play by Ibsen and you remove the realistic parts of it, you really do have a play that is expressionism, and it's quite evident. However, it was Strindberg, Augustus Strindberg, who was a contemporary of Ibsen, who experimented, whose work was deeply subconscious. He even entitled one of them Dream Play, and he had 3 of them, Dream Play 1, 2, and 3. And he had another seminal work which was called To Damascus. His plays, unlike Ibsen's, were not readily accepted, and he had difficulty getting them produced. Some were even banned as being outlandish. Now, expressionism in the theater, like expressionism in painting, is not a matter of being real, a faithful reproduction. It's not governed by an object. A model like, say, a realistic painting, that is, a flower is a flower, looks like a flower, or landscapes and buildings are represented as seen, but this is not the aim of the theater of expressionism. It is instead highly subjective and necessarily distorted, as are the images of the subconscious. I ask, which is more real? What the eye sees, or what the mind conjures? You might be inclined to say, well, what the eye sees. But to the individual, most real is the subconscious experience because it is uniquely his. All individuals are unique. There are no two alike, and consequently there are no two subconsciousness alike. In an abstract painting, a painting may be subjective, but totally devoid of subject matter. You may have heard said, why, any child can do this, but that's not true. Because the artist of an abstract painting has no model, nothing to guide him but his intuition and his imagination. Expressionism in painting is like an abstract imagery. What is it in the theater? It is a distortion, a distorted view of the world addressed directly to the audience. The leading characters are seen in what is a cone of light. Language, as urgent telegraphies, come in explosive verse tirades. Mostly, there is a rejection of respectability. The crowned heads of Europe and the round heads of Baltimore are irreverently depicted. Scenes are many and fragmented, just like a dream. I shall read now from another earlier play, one of the earlier models. This is called Humanity. In it, this is by William Hosensclever. In this play, we have a displacement of conceptual language by exclamation and pantomime. It somewhat resembles a loosely a Christian miracle play, a Christian passion play, like the Stations of the Cross. Humanities is a loosely connected life story, a series of stations, pictures, and situations instead of a plot. It's a demonstration rather than a drama. I shall read from the first act. Time is today, the place is the world. This is scene one, act one. I shall read it just exactly the way the play is written. Cemetery, sunset, a cross falls down. Alexander rises from the grave. The murderer comes with sack. Alexander startled. The murderer, I have killed. He hands Alexander the sack. Alexander stretches out his hand. The murderer, the head is in the sack. He goes toward the grave and he climbs in. Alexander throws dirt over him. There's a gust of wind. The chapel becomes bright. A youth and a girl appear. The youth said, "Who is there?" The girl, "A corpse." She faints. The youth, "Murderer, Alexander, your coat." The youth takes off his coat and Alexander covers himself. The youth, "Who are you?" Alexander says, "I am alive." He takes the sack over his shoulder and he exits. The girl awakens. The youth embraces her. The girl screams, "I have deceived you." End of scene one. Scene two. We're in a hall, a large open space. It's night. Laid tables, curtain in the background, a niche on either side. The hall becomes bright. An old waiter and a guest. The old waiter reads the paper. He says, "Murder." The guest lasciviously lays. The old waiter, a head is missing. The guest, one beer. Alexander comes in with a sack too, and the guest says, a sex murder? The old waiter says, reward? The guest says, check. Oh, the old waiter, one roast beef. The guest, a man? The old waiter, $3.90. The guest leaves. The old Alexander enters and he says, humanity. The old waiter says, Alexander? Alexander, where am I? And the old waiter says, missing. This is scene 3. A niche at the right becomes bright. A ragged man sitting at a table covered with bottles. The tipper says, I am dreaming. And the hall becomes dark. Alexander enters. The tippler hands him the glass. Alexander drinks. The tippler, you are starving. Alexander looks up. The tippler says, brother, and he embraces him. The innkeeper enters, and he says, money. The tippler searches in his jacket. The innkeeper says, 6 bottles. Alexander says, I want work. The innkeeper says, as a waiter, points to the hall, and he exits. Lisi enters, and she says, man. The tippler, are you sick? She says, I avenge myself. She leaves. Alexander stretches out his arms, and he says, love. That's the 4th scene. The left ditch becomes right. A man in tailcoat stands around the table. There's a judge, a banker, and a helper. There's an invisible voice says, play, and gentlemen throwing money on the table. The right ditch becomes dark. The banker says, who is there? The helper says, a corpse. Roaring and laughter, and the banker, handing his money, says, stake. Alexander says, staking. A voice, 13. Banker, bravo. Helper, luck. Gentlemen, let it be. Voice, 13. Banker, dead. Gentlemen, you must. Banker, throwing money on the table. Voice, 13. Gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. Banker, the remainder. Throwing money on the table. The voice again says, 13. The judge. The banker says, I pass. Voice says, 13. And the banker tears off his shirt and his collar. And the gentlemen say, room. Banker says, my watch. And he throws his watch on the table. The helper says, his last will. There's a silence, and the banker clenches his fist. The judge rings the bell, and masked men enter. Banker screaming, my number's up. The masked men open up a trapdoor, and they shove him in. The judge says, cleaned out. The table becomes visible. Alexander stands before the money, and the gentlemen say, now, hands off. The masked men return. The gentlemen pile money on the table, and the judge says, farewell. Gentlemen, the voice again says, 13, and the table collapses. It goes on from there. So there is an excellent example of disjointed speech and many, many scenes. And is an attempt to portray on the stage what the mind goes through. If you think of your own subconscious, you know it flashes from here to there, back again, and this was a playwright doing just exactly that. Now, again, to continue, what pushed Expressionism along was the early movies. I think there was a show here that showed some early movies, black and whites and that sort of thing. And it had an immense influence on the development of the theater. It led to an increased number of elements to be incorporated in staging a drama. And this led to what was called a director's theater. A highly competent, creative, imaginative director was and is now required to stage an expressionistic play. It had to have some controlling mind, a conductor of all the ingredients to create the total effect of theater. Now, once the only resource theaters had, particularly the little theaters, where experimental work was welcome, was the actor. If he was good, the production was good. But that's not true today. Much depends on the skill and the expertise of the director. His understanding of the process, his understanding of human nature, of human behavior and human intuition. After World War I, the United States was little affected, of course, by the devastation of Europe and the consequent effect it had on the theater. It did, however, experience some change. It neither clung to the past, nor it rejected it. What it did was merge Expressionism, a product of the trauma in Europe, with naturalism. This can be seen in the plays and the works of Elmer Rice, Eugene O'Neill, Arthur Miller, but it was really the social upheaval that was caused by the Great Depression in this country, which had its greatest effect on the theater in America. It caused naturalism to wane. Of course, the commercial theater continued to outweigh the experimental, but the experimental welcomed the unconventional, which was really the creative energy of the time. And during the Depression, the Federal Works program presented over 800 plays, pageants and whatnot, and many of these were really experimental. Those of you who may have been around may well remember Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater. How many know, how many are aware of Orson Welles? My age. The Expressionist and Surrealist movement became representative of the modern theater in Europe, particularly in Germany, where Expressionism became a quasi-religion, a quasi-religious experience, and its aim was emotional transcendence communicated by stylized movement, staccato vocalization. The actors, for the most part, acted like men possessed. There was visual economy. We had bare sets. Focus was on the actor, the human figure. Lighting became varied and intense to reflect the mood. Now, instead of war, the protest in this country was against social injustice. And one of the most notable plays at the time was Tennessee Williams' Glass Menagerie. And there was Arthur Miller's after the fall. Both of these plays were expressionism wrapped in a cloak of naturalism. Now, Arthur Miller's play is a declamatory monologue, and I shall read from the beginning of that, which will illustrate this is Act 1, and I will start out with the stage instructions because it's important. It's indicative of the way expressionist plays were staged. Act 1, the action takes place in the mind, thought, and memory of Quentin. Quentin is the central character in the play. These are the instructions. Except for one chair, there is no furniture in the conventional sense. There are no walls or substantial boundaries. The setting consists of 3 levels, rising to the highest at the back, crossing in a curve from one side of the stage to the other. A stairway center connects them. Rising above all and dominating the stage is a blasted stone tower of a German concentration camp. Its wide outlook windows are like eyes which at the moment seem blind and dark. Bent reinforcing rods stick out as if like broken tentacles. On the 2 lower levels are sculpted areas. Indeed, the whole effect is Neolithic, a lava-like, supple geography in which, like pits and hollows bound in lava, the scenes take place. Now, as I mentioned before, he too mentions here the mind has no color, but its memories are brilliant against the grayness of its landscape. When people sit, they do so on any of the abutments, ledges, or crevices. A scene may start in a confined area, but spread or burst out upon the entire stage, overrunning any other area. Now, people appear and disappear instantaneously as in the mind, but it is not necessary that they walk off the stage. The dialogue will make clear who is alive at any moment and who is in abeyance. The effect, therefore, will be the surging, flitting, instantaneous of a mind, questing over its own surface and into its depth. Remember, I said Expressionism was probing the subconscious. This is a demonstration of that. Now, the stage is dark. Now, there is a sense that some figure has moved in the furthest distance. A footstep is heard, then others. As light dimly rises, the persons in the play move in a random way up from beneath the back platform. Whispering emanates from them. Some sit at once, others come forward downstage, seem to recognize one another. Still others move along and in total separateness. In short, there is a totally random congeries of movement in a slow but not dreamlike rhythm. Out of them, Quentin, a man in his 40s, moves out of despair and down the depth of the stage to a chair. This chair faces front toward the audience. A sharp light now isolates it. This is cone of light on him. All movement ceases. Quentin reaches forward over the chair back to shake the hand of the listener, who sitting just beyond the edge of the stage. Quentin. Hello? God? Why, it's good to see you again. I'm very well. I hope it wasn't too inconvenient on such short notice. Fine. I just wanted to say hello, really. Thanks. How have you been? You look sunburned. Oh, I have never been to South America. You enjoy it? That's nice. Do I? Oh, I guess I am. I'm quite healthy. I do a lot of walking now. I started to call you a couple of times this year. Last year, too. Well, I lost the impulse. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, and at my age, it's discouraging to still have to go wandering around in one's mind. Actually, I called you on the spur of the moment this morning. I have a bit of a decision to make. You know, you mull around about something for months, and all of a sudden, there it is, and you're at loss for what to do with it. Were you able to give me 2 hours? It might not take that long, but I think it involves a great deal, and I'd rather not rush it. Okay? I quit the firm. Didn't I write you about that? Really? I was sure I'd written it. Oh, about 14 months ago, a few weeks after Maggie died. No, I've withdrawn completely. I still hold my interest, such as it is, but I'm out of it. Well, it just got to where I couldn't concentrate on a case anymore. Not the way I used to. It's hard to describe it. It all lost its necessity. I was going on because I started out to become a successful lawyer, a successful attorney, and I become one. I felt I was merely in the service of my own success. There has to be some semblance of a point, and I couldn't find it anymore. Although I do wonder sometimes if I am simply trying to destroy myself. Well, I have walked away from that, from what passes for an important career. Not very much, I'm afraid. I still live in a hotel, see a few people, read a good deal, stare out of the window. I don't know why I'm smiling. Maybe I feel that that's all over now, and I'll harness myself to something again, although I've had that feeling before, and I've done nothing about it. John, I wrote you about that, didn't I? Maybe I dreamed these letters. Mother died, 4 or 5 months ago now. Yes, quite suddenly. I was in Germany at the time. It's one of those things I wanted to talk to you about. I met a woman there. I never thought it could happen again. But we became quite close. In fact, she's arriving tonight for some conference at Columbia University. She's an archaeologist. I'm not sure, you see, if I want to lose her, and yet it's outrageous to think of committing myself again. Well, yes, but look at my life. A life, after all, is evidence. And I have had 2 divorces. I have now 2 divorces in my safe deposit box. I tell you frankly, I'm a little afraid of who and what I'd be bringing to her. And I thought I could say aloud what I see when I'm alone. Well, for example, this. You know, more and more, I see that for many years, I looked at life like a case of law. It was a series of proofs. And when you're young, you prove you're brave, you prove you are smart, then what a good lover you are, then a good father, and finally how wise or powerful or what the hell ever. But underlying it all, I see now there was a presumption that one moved not in a dry circle, but on an upward path towards some elevation where, God knows what, I would be justified or even condemned. A verdict anyway, I think now that my disaster really began when I looked up one day and the bench was empty. No judge. And all that remained was the endless argument with myself, this pointless litigation of existence before an empty bench, which of course is another way. Gradually, Expressionism gave way to a movement, a short-lived movement called Surrealism. That was in turn replaced by the theater of the absurd, which was motivated by the political ferment of the 60s, the counterculture, and the avant-garde theater had a new cause. We will now take a short break. We're all here. Now, since, as I mentioned at closing, Expressionism gave way to the theater of the absurd. There's still Expressionism around, but today, in the little theaters, in the avant-garde theaters, there is a movement called the theater of the absurd. Now, how did this come about? It was since the turn of the century, particularly after the 2 world wars, there has been a drastic change in beliefs that were once sacredly held, not only in this country, in Western Europe, but in all of the Christian world. These Christian beliefs in God, the Christian belief in God has been weakened, if not entirely discarded. God to many today is dead. Perhaps it's not acknowledged, but it's manifests itself in a lack of ritual and the influence on our daily lives. This has let us search for ways to confront the universe which no longer is supported by certainties. That is the certainty that you find in religion. This has led to us, as I say, we have been deprived of this center of the purpose for living, and because of this, much of the world, much of the universe is now looked upon as being absurd. We feel it's absurd. Once there was an unquestioned faith in a hereafter, the reward for a chaste life and good works is no longer a criteria for good behavior. I ask, what has happened to heaven and hell in our daily lives? What was once certainty has now become an uncertainty, which leaves man searching for a purpose. If he is not here to do the will of God, what is he here for? The theater and poets seek to convey this sense of loss over the disappearance of this certainty and all that it entails. In the theater, which concerns us this evening, the movement is known as the theater of the absurd. And this was first identified in an essay by Martin Esslin, E-S-S-L-I-N. Left without certainties about the creation of the universe, without purpose for humans, without heaven or hell as eventual destinations, what we do appears to be absurd. The certainties, the beliefs fundamental to Christian belief, and the unity that came from it are gone. There is a quest for replacement. It is quite possible that what the theater of absurd is doing or does is a genuine religious quest, maybe to again praise God. What it does is make man aware of the ultimate realities. We have lost a sense of cosmic wonder, of primeval anguish, and the mysteries of the human condition. Now, once ritual of religion and ancient beliefs and awareness of the human condition brought to man a dignity and a stability in his life. It made man a part of the community and not just so many atoms and genes. Now, it's the theater of the absurd that reveals the absurdity of lives that we are perhaps unaware of, unconscious, or deliberately blinded to the ultimate reality, which is, of course, death, for which we wait all our lives. We are born and we wait for death. Why then are we alive? How does the theater of the absurd approach this? How does it do this? It does it by social criticism, by satire, by parody. It reveals the decline of religious beliefs which has deprived man of once held certainties. Where, you ask, is the divine purpose? Where is man today when stripped of the accidental circumstances of his social position, or the historical context, or a historical context. Really, he's nowhere. Man is faced with time and nothing else. He is therefore waiting. Now, once there was a confrontation with myths and religious reality. Who made us? God made us. Why did God make us? To serve Him. And in the ancient Greek tragedies, in the medieval mystery plays, man was made aware of the precarious and mysterious position of his precarious and mysterious position in the universe. It was the function of religion and the function of the theater to bring the message. Today, the theater of the absurd represents a return to this original function of the theater. We are inclined to think of the theater in terms of plays in a darkened auditorium, behind a proscenium, but festivals, pageants, processions, the Mass, are theater. The sermon the clergyman delivers is theater. Today, there is an absence of accepted cosmic systems of value. It is difficult to express the ways of God to modern man. Ancient myths and beliefs are denied them. In the light of what we know, what science has uncovered, only human intuition of the ultimate reality can be presented. As he experiences it, as he knows it, we shall die. The universe must inevitably come to an end. When the last burst of energy has been expended, why then all the striving, all the pushing, and the shoving? What is there left for man? The depth of his personality, his dreams, his fantasies, his nightmares. This is the real individual. This is his unique personality, his personal reality, shared by no one else, and for the most part, with no one else. That it represents the hidden 75% of us, of the individual. Once there was a coherent, recognized version of the truth. All believed in a shared destiny, a shared vision of the world, but that you can't say that today. We now recognize man's individual vision of the world, his personal intuition of what it is, what he believes the universe to be, and his own sense of being. This has become the subject matter of the theater of the absurd. It determines form and convention, which are entirely different from the realistic theater that deals with externalities, the visible, and not the unseen, the unspoken. It is not concerned with problems or destinies outside of another's world. It does not present events, the fate, or adventures of a character. Instead, it presents an individual's situation. It is theater of the absurd, theater of a situation against theater of events or sequence. Now, argument and discursive speech give way to language based on a pattern of images, the kind of images that float through the mind randomly, without sequence, often without relationship. These random images do not solve problems of conduct or morals. Quite the contrary, they may permit unrestricted license. The theater of the absurd is a poetic form of a basic, static situation, not a line of development like a realistic play, instead a pattern of images and associations. Its elements aim at concentration and depth in a lyrical, poetic pattern. It abandons psychology, it abandons plot, and it abandons characterization. It is like a dream, expressing intuition as in a single moment. It endeavors to communicate a total sense of being, to present a truer picture of reality as apprehended by an individual, as you, the individual, apprehends it. Now, early pioneers were Ibsen and Strindberg, I mentioned them before, and today's dramatists continue this movement. They ask, how does an individual feel confronted with the human situation? What is his mood? His feelings about himself? This becomes a theater of the absurd play. When we comprehend the world at any given moment, we receive a complex of perceptions and feelings instantaneously. No artist, no playwright, no poet can turn these perceptions and feelings into conceptual terms of language without, I say, without evaluating and disintegrating the language or the concept. In other words, it's beyond words. We must turn, however, to poetry, which is itself ambiguous and associative. It's like music. Pure poetry dispenses with logic, discursive thought, and language. Like poetry, the stage is ideally suited to the communication of complex images. It is at once visual and verbal. There is light, movement, sound, and language. Now, the theater can be classified as literate or anti-literate. Language, of course, predominates in the literate plays, whereas action predominates in anti-literate performances. And these, of course, broadly are circuses and musical performances. But in the theater of the absurd, uses both. It is a multi-dimensional, a poetic imagery. Language may be reduced to meaningless pattern, discursive logic abandoned for poetic logic. The poetic logic of association or assonance. The evaluation of language is characteristic of not only the theater of the absurd, but characteristic of our times. It's all around us, this evaluation. Much of it begins outside, much of what is around us begins outside of language. Meaningful experience such as mathematics, formulae, symbols, the internet. There is non-objective art and atonal music. Language more and more appears to be a contradiction of reality. It's language that exposes the apparent and not real reality. How frequently we are faced with the reality that we don't believe what anyone says, what anyone tells us, what's printed. We look for something behind the meaning. Is that not true? There is a big gap between conscious thought and asserted and psychological reality behind the spoken and the written word. And there is skepticism. Now, of all that once was certain, we are becoming more and more skeptical toward language and the use of language. The mass media, the press, advertising, and TV have made us so. The double talk of governments, of politicians. We have a tendency to read between the lines rather than accept the written or spoken word at its face value. Then also we have highly specialized nature. The highly specialized nature of modern society has led us to a specialized jargon which only the specialists understand. I find that fine to read a book by a sociologist or a psychologist, and it's so filled with illusions of one kind or another that you almost have to have a special book to identify what they're talking about. Now, the theater of the absurd dramatizes this breakdown of respect for what is written, and it does it by satirical magnification of the existing state of affairs. Language is no longer an expression of authentic content. It is, in fact, for the most part, concealment. Think how many meanings a single word may have. Take the word hump. The dictionary gives it 4 meanings as a noun, 3 as a verb, and of course there are slang meanings as well. What we need to do today is to restore confidence in language, the written word and the discursive thought. Now, the theater of the absurd attempts to do this by shocking people into a full realization of how not only language, but our society is disintegrating because of this downgrading of language. Now we get a grotesquely heightened and distorted picture of the world around us. A world, really, if you stop to think about it, a world that has gone mad. In the realistic theater, the audience, you, identifies with the main character in a play, accepts his point of view, sees the world as he sees it, with his eyes, feels it as he does, feels his emotion, and this robs the audience, you, of a critical prerogative. How can you criticize what has become a part of you? Now, in the theater of the absurd, the characters are largely incomprehensible and almost impossible to identify. And we have unidentified characters who inevitably are comic. Therefore, the theater of the absurd characters being incomprehensible, their motives unexplained, mysterious, often beyond identification, the theater of the absurd becomes a comic theater. Now, even if it is somber, bitter, and violent, we have black humor. We have laughter with horror. What is presented is a world which we recognize, which has become absurd, which has lost its meaning and purpose. Truly, truly and absurdity. Now, as you well know, stupid characters who act in mad ways are always funny. Slapstick comedians, circus clowns, the man who accidentally drops his pants is always good for a laugh. In the theater of the absurd, instead of the action being rational, the whole action is mysterious, seemingly unmotivated, and nonsensical, consequently humorous. What does this then do for the audience in the light of what I had just said about the uncertainties of our world, our universe? It liberates hidden fears by generating a sense of social ease. It just doesn't happen to us. The man who drops his pants, it's his problem, not ours. Though it might, what's the harm? What's the harm if you laugh at somebody else? It represses regression. The man who drops his pants is defenseless. This, unconsciously or consciously, stimulates the mind of the spectator. Man is shown alone in the world, just with his problems. A world of demonic power, helpless in his anxiety, and unable to cope. This representation disorients the audience, which is compelled to face a new experience of himself. He is forced to make a creative effort to interpret and integrate himself in a world that is shown to be absurd, so full of uncertainty, that the absurdities are overwhelming. Now why the current madness and consequent absurdity? Well, we are confronted with unreconciled beliefs and attitudes. We have Christianity versus scientific dogma. We have conventional morality versus the values of advertising. To smoke or not to smoke, which shall it be? People's lungs or the tobacco industry? And all around us, the conflicting claims of science and religion. We have the universe started the billions and billions of years ago with a big bang. And on the other hand, we have creationists who say that it started 4,000 years ago, that God created the universe in 7 days. 6 really, he rested the 7th day. And we are swamped by such differences and conflicting patterns of thought and feeling. In the ancient Greek tragedy, man was made aware of the forlorn but heroic stand, his stand against the forces of fate. It was the will of the gods. This stand helped him face them. Today, what helps man confronted with the madness of the human condition, illusions and felt fears and anxieties, what helps him meet these uncertainties? The former supports are gone. Instead of Greek tragedy and medieval morality place, we have the theater of the absurd, which seeks to help him liberate himself from anxiety and fear that he intuitively feels. The inescapable knowledge that fundamentally the universe is absurd. Now, the seminal play for the theater of the absurd is generally recognized as Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Drudo. This was written in 1950. In this play, there is a laughable, tragic, comic situation of two near tramps hopelessly waiting for a miracle which they cannot define nor surmise its effect. Drudo, God. But they are certain it is the solution. We are able to laugh at these tramps, the stupidity, the absurdity of their faith, their waiting, and at ourselves, waiting for the same miracle. And when we laugh, we relieve ourselves of the same tensions and the anxieties that these two tramps experience. Now, every play has dramatic tensions. In the realistic, naturalistic play, the well-made play, suspense is caused by an objective plot, an unfolding narrative. The plot is an objective reality. The boy gets the girl. Crime does not pay, or does it? At the end, there is a solution. What will happen? What did happen? Now, the theater of the absurd offers no problem, no solution, and no lesson. There is no motivation, no identifiable characters. The question is not what is going to happen, but what is happening. The audience is asked to formulate his own questions. The play builds a complex pattern of poetic images. The suspense consists of waiting for the completion of the pattern. Since the theater of the absurd offers no plot, no problem, no solution, what is it? It's a purely subjective expression of the author's vision and emotion. In art, we have the same parallel. In the art of the abstract painter is entirely his vision and his emotion. Now, the question always comes up at this point: how does one distinguish the genuine from the impostor? How do you know it's a play, the work of a dramatist in the theater of the absurd? And this, of course, is the same question you ask of all modern art and all literature. I think there was I don't know whether it was in the same context or not, but there was a program here where the lecturer asked, is this art? So it's very difficult to say. But the critics in the theater based their estimate and analysis on conventions. Somebody's rules, somebody's norms of behavior, mostly of polite behavior. They ask, is it pretty? Do the people act rationally? But these rules, these norms, these rules cannot be applied to the theater of the absurd because it is not concerned with behavior. Instead, it is concerned with poetic images designed to communicate to the audience the personal perplexity of the audience confronted with the human condition. So it is a subjective effort, like abstract painting. Just as it is most difficult to construct a non-objective abstract painting, so it is to create the irrational imagery of the theater of the absurd. In a realistic painting with a model, the artist can fall back on the reality of the model. In a realistic play, the dramatist experience and observation. You have known characters, known events, witnessed by the author. These become his model and the point of departure. But in the theater of the absurd, we have a complete invention. just as we have in an abstract painting, or, say, in atonal music, a product of the imagination which must make sense to the audience on some level in its own right. It mirrors the subconscious mind of the author, his dreams, his fantasies. The images portrayed must make sense, must have a quality of truth, a quality of genuine truth. Now, in a well-made play, a witty comedy of manners, say, that may be more laborious, require a high degree of ingenuity or intelligence, but the theater of the absurd requires a high degree of creative vision instead of invention, and it must be inspirational. While a realistic play may be concerned with representation of the truth, believable at least, theater of the absurd, on the other hand, is concerned with personal vision, the truth of the author's intuition. So we have here a theater of objectivity, objective reality, and a theater of subject reality. There are two very different aspects of reality. Because of its subjective reality, theater of the absurd enters the sphere of religion. There is a difference between knowing something and experiencing it as a living reality. This distinction is religion. Now, today, science may attempt to explain religion. Religion does not attempt to explain science. Science may give us a coherent philosophy in scientific method, but it has no means of making it a living reality, a focus on man's life. With a decline in enlightening ritual and science with no ritual, theater of the absurd may assume the function of a substitute church. I would like to call your attention to the fact that the totalitarian states, the regimes of Hitler in Germany and Stalin in Russia, both of them relied heavily on the theater to transport their message. The scientific attitude prevails today provides only a partial view of the world. The theater of the absurd supplements this with a much wider view, a wider vision of the world, of its absurdities and the mysteries to be confronted and dealt with. Scientific attitude accepts the view that there will always be large segments of knowledge and experience. They will always remain unknown, never be known, and much that religions seek to explain must forever remain unexplained. Any attempt it now may make must appear illusionary and self-deceptive. Who is right? The Big Bang theorists or the creationists? Man has always been surrounded by vast areas of impenetrable darkness. He can never know why the world was created, never know what part has been assigned to him, what exactly constitutes right and wrong, and what no one will provide, and that no one will provide a complete answer. Science, no. Religion, no. At best, they can do is offer assumptions. Now, the theater of the absurd expresses these anxieties, these uncertainties. The uncertainty of the ultimate destruction and the extinction of the universe. With uncertainty comes anxiety and despair over the total lack of revealed alternatives. And the theater of the absurd asks us to face up to this reality, discard the illusions we have about the universe. In other words, be aware that nothing is more real than nothing. In the beginning, the early Christian mystical experience included an awareness of the emptiness and nothingness of the universe. The early mystics spoke of the soul's intuition as not being able to comprehend God at all. They asked that we reject conceptual thought, don't question, accept. So where does that leave us today, tonight? The theater of the absurd recognizes the dethronement of language and logic, as does the scientific attitude, that it is not necessary and essential for mystical attitude toward reality, a reality we now know to be too complex to be validly expressed by orderly conceptual thought. The ancient mystics resorted to poetic imagery, but that imagery has been discredited by an astonishing body of knowledge that refutes the old imagery. Thus it is the mission of the theater of the absurd to reveal what may be mystical experiences and absolute otherness, and the ineffability of ultimate reality. It is a return to the old, even archaic traditions. It is a radical departure from naturalisms and narrative conventions that have become familiar after centuries of use. We are back to a theater that is more than language, back to a theater of performance. I had intended to read from Waiting for Drudo. We are approaching the end. Would you like me to go on and read some of that play? I will. This is, as I say, the seminal play, Waiting for Drudo. There are 5 characters in this play: Estragon, Valdemir, Lucky, Pozo, and the boy. The scene is a country road, and on the stage there's one bare tree, and it's evening. Estragon, sitting on a low mound, is trying to take his Drudo. He pulls at it with both hands. 10. He gives up, exhausted. Rests, tries again as before. Enter Valdemir. Estragon. Nothing to be done. Valdemir. I'm beginning to come around to that opinion. All my life, I've tried to put it from me, saying, Valdemir, be reasonable. You haven't yet tried everything. And I resumed the struggle. Turning to Estragon, so there you are again. Estragon says, am I? Valdemir, I'm glad to see you're back. I thought you were gone forever. Estragon, me too. Valdemir, together again at last. We'll have to celebrate this, but how? Get up. Till I embraced you. Estragon, not now, not now. Valdemir, may one inquire where His Highness spent the night? Estragon, in a ditch. A ditch? Where? Over there. And didn't they beat you? Beat me? Certainly they beat me. The same lot as usual? The same? I don't know. Well, when I think of it, all these years, but for me, where would you be? You'd be nothing more than a little heap of bones at the present minute, no doubt about it, Estragon. And what of it? Baltimore? It's too much from one man. On the other hand, what's the good of losing heart now? That's what I say. We should have thought of it a million years ago, in the 90s. Stop blathering and help me pull off this bloody thing. Baltimore, hand in hand from the top of the Eiffel Tower, among the first. We were respectable in those days. Now it's too late. They wouldn't even let us up. What are you doing? I'm trying to check off my boot. Did that never happen to you? Baltimore, boots must be taken off every day. I'm tired of telling you that. Why don't you listen to me? Oh, help me, please. It hurts? Hurts? He wants to know if it hurts. No one, Baltimore says, no one ever suffers but you. I don't count. I'd like to hear what you say if you had what I have. It hurts? Hurts. He wants to know if it hurts. Say you might button up the fly. Baltimore, oh yeah. Never neglect the little things in life. Estragon, what do you expect? You always wait till the last moment. Baltimore, the last moment. Hope deferred maketh the something sick. Who said that? Oh, why don't you help me? Sometimes I feel it coming all the same. Then I go all queer. How shall I say it? Appalled. Appalled. Funny. Nothing to be done. Estragon pulls off with supreme effort. He pulls his boot off. He appears inside it, feels about inside it, turns it upside down, shakes it, looks on the ground to see if anything had fallen out, finds nothing, feels inside again, staring sightlessly before him. Baltimore says, well? Estragon says, nothing. Baltimore, show? There's nothing to show. Try to put it on again. Oh, I'll air it for a while. There's man all over for you, blaming on his boots the fault of his feet. Baltimore takes off his hat. He peers inside it, feels about inside it, knocks on the ground, blows into it, puts it on again. He says, this is alarming. You know, one of the thieves was saved. It's a reasonable percentage. Jojo? Estragon, what? Baltimore, suppose we repented. Repented what? Oh, we shouldn't have to go into details. Estragon, are being born? Baltimore, one can't even laugh. anymore. Estrogen, dreadful privation. Valdemar merely smiled. It's not the same thing. Nothing to be done. Jojo, Estrogen, what is it? Did you ever read the Bible? The Bible? I must have taken a look at it sometime. Do you remember the Gospel? I remember the map of the Holy Land. Colored they were. Very pretty. The Dead Sea was pale blue. And every look of it made me thirsty. That's where we'll go. I used to say, that's where we'll go for our honeymoon. We'll swim, we'll be happy. Valdemar, you should have been a poet. Estrogen, I was. Isn't that obvious? Valdemar, where was I? How's your foot? Swelling visibly. Valdemar, oh, yes, the two thieves. Do you remember the story? No. Shall I tell it to you? No. It'll pass the time. Two thieves crucified at the same time as our Savior. One, our what? Our Savior. Two thieves. One is supposed to have been saved, and the other damned. Saved from what? Hell. Estrogen, I'm going. Valdemar, and yet, how is it that this is not boring you, I hope? How is it that out of 4 evangelists, only one speaks of a thief being saved? The 4 of them were there, or thereabouts, and only one speaks of a thief being saved. Come on, Jojo, return the ball, can't you, once in a while? Estrogen, I find this really most extraordinarily interesting. Valdemar, 1 out of 4. Of the 4, of the other 3, 2 didn't mention any thieves at all. And the 3rd says that both of them abused him. Estrogen. Valdemar, what? Estrogen, what's all this about? Abused who? Valdemar, the Savior. Estrogen, why? Because he wouldn't save them. From hell? Oh, imbecile. From death. I thought you said hell. From death. Death. Well, what of it? Then the 2 of them must have been damned. And why not? But one of the 4 says that one of the 2 was saved. Well, they don't agree, that's all. That's all there is to it. Valdemar, but all 4 of them were there. And only one speaks of a thief being saved. Why believe him rather than the others? Who believes him? Why, everybody. It's the only version they have. People are ignorant apes. Thank you very much.